So we will go ahead and get started today in the interest of time because we have a very tight panel today. We have a lot of individuals joining us. I'm very happy to have you all here. My name is Kimberly Meck, and I am the Executive Director of the Alliance of People with Disabilities. I am a white female with my long hair tied up behind me. I have sunglasses on my head. I'm wearing a black zip-up hoodie with a green shirt underneath. And behind me, you can see part of the ceiling fan in my bedroom ceiling. I'm going to cover some housekeeping and accessibility information briefly, so that way we can make sure that everybody has the ability to participate with us today. We have captions available in Zoom. If you click on Show Subtitle in your Zoom menu bar to turn them on. Captions are also running in stream text. The URL is too long to read, but Robin has put the link into stream text or into chat for us. In stream text, it allows you to enlarge the font and change the color and contrast to the captioning. There's also a chat feature on stream text, so you're welcome to submit questions or comments there, and we'll monitor them and voice any questions during Q&A. ASL interpreters are available today. We're presenting in gallery view, so the interpreters should always be visible. You do not need to pin them. Please note that we have 2 interpreters, so if you pin the current interpreter, it could prevent you from seeing the active interpreter during an interpreter change. You do not need to be on Zoom to access this event. We will read all questions out loud and voice any images on the screen so that content will be available to all individuals on the phone or who cannot see visual content. This event is being recorded, and we will answer questions periodically throughout the discussion. Please use the Q&A tab for any questions you have for the panelists, and please use the chat tab for any general conversations or comments. The cart chat can be used for both questions or comments. And please note that we will be using person with a disability and disabled person interchangeably, recognizing different people's preferences for person first or identity first language. And that covers the housekeeping. So I'm going to introduce Robin Tatsuda to cover some other additional features.
Thanks, Kimberly. Hi, everyone. My name is Robin Tatsuda. I'm the Executive Director of the ARC of King County. I use she, her pronouns. I am a biracial, cisgender female with short, dark hair. In fact, it's sort of in my face right now, and I apologize for that. I'm wearing a blue shirt and a headset with a little microphone, sitting in my friend's home office with some pictures on the wall behind me. I just want to take a minute or two to orient you to this event, and I don't want to take a lot of time because that's not why you're here. But if this is the first time joining our Understanding Ableism series, I want to help you understand the context behind it. This is actually the 4th of our Understanding Ableism monthly series. These events are hosted by the King County Disability Consortium, which is composed of over 40 disability-serving organizations and individuals with disabilities, including activists and advocates. These Understanding Ableism events are led by the disability community to promote disability justice within the King County enterprise. In this 4th edition of our series, we're focused on ableism and disability and deaf justice within the schools. The partners for today are our panelists, and they'll introduce themselves. In addition to the Governor's Office of the Education Ombuds, Inclusion for All, PAVE, Roots of Inclusion, and Sarah Arvey, who's from the UW College of Education. So I'm going to hand it over to Carrie Bassis, who's the director at the Governor's Office of the Education Ombuds, who will lead us through the evening. Carrie, take it away.
Hi, I'm Carrie Bassis, and she, her pronouns. I am a woman with pale skin, wearing with shoulder length brown wavy hair, wearing a pretty funky print dress that has snow leopards on it and giant mouths and swans. So I just wanted to welcome everyone and recognize that we are coming from many places today. And I would like to acknowledge the land where I'm joining from, which is the unceded ancestral lands of the Duwamish and Coast Salish people. I want to honor their contributions and knowledge since time immemorial, and I will work to build authentic and restorative relationships as part of social justice. Today, we have a panel of students who have experienced disability and deaf justice issues, as well as intersectional identities and communities. They range in age from middle school through their mid-20s. And during this time when many of us are talking about what schools should look like, we really felt like we should hear from students about how they would lead schools and the changes that they would make, especially in light of the pandemic, racial justice, and a greater focus on Black joy and expertise. We really need to be led by students as adults, especially the wisdom of disabled and deaf and blind students. So here are central questions for today, which also appear in the chat. And we'll go around and have everyone introduce themselves and answer the first question. What has school been like for you? And then later we will ask, what would schools look like if you led them? And what is the role of non-disabled or non-deaf people and being allies or accomplices in this work? So thanks so much, and we will get our panel kicked off. I'm going to ask Anita to weigh in first and share your description as well, and a bit of an intro, as well as get us started on that first question about what school has been like for you. Thanks, Anita.
Thanks, Carrie. Hi, my name is Anita. My pronouns are she, her. I am a Indian woman with brown skin. I have long black hair. I'm wearing red glasses. I have a blue shirt with pink and red flowers on it and a black sweater on top. I am currently in Seattle, Washington, and I use a manual wheelchair and have since the age of 4. I have always attended school as a wheelchair user and a person with disability. I am now in grad school studying to be a teacher, so I have seen both sides of the classroom as both an educator and a student. School for me as a kid was fairly inaccessible. I had friends and I did really well with them and enjoyed them. But the physical environment was a big challenge to me. I struggled to get around the classroom. I struggled to play on the playground. And in every school that I went to, there seemed to be a theme of, I went to the school and then I seemed to leave and the school was like, let's fix this problem so that the next student doesn't have to deal with it, which is great for that next student. But for me, it was really disappointing because the change happened after I left. Carrie, I think that's all I have to add, unless there's anything I missed.
No, Anita, this is Carrie. That was great. And it really resonated what you said about the physical environment being a barrier, as well as the commitment to fixing it later, which I hope happened for other students, but we can talk more about later about how that drove you to the kind of work that you're doing. And so, Abby, would you like to go next with just an intro to who you are and what school looked like for you?
Okay, hi. My name is Abby Griffith. I am Black and I am wearing white t-shirt and red jacket. I am a student at Washington State University. I am studying human development. I'm very excited. I will be graduating next month. Um, my pronouns she, her, and hers. Um, um, I live in Vancouver, Washington. I almost forget that. What has school have been like to me. I think school, especially middle school and high school, um, it was very stressful for me. Um, um, a lot of anxiety and stress, not only accessibility. Accessibility was not issue because I went to school for the blind. We use mostly reading braille and uh, things accessible, at least. That was not a problem, but my problem was just stress and being blocked and uh, being English is my third language, having accent and put me the position that I am lesser than other students around, especially around the students and some around people. Um, it was stressful because of my differences. And I think, I don't know if I miss anything.
This is Carrie. Now, I think that's a really helpful start, and I hope that you'll have time later to talk more about how those intersecting oppressions and identities and areas of pride with language as well, and racial pride came up, because it sounds like those things were not celebrated and honored in ways that they should have been, and then combined with being blind. I think that's a really wonderful point to bring out as we're talking about what schools should look like in the future too. Thank you for sharing that. And Grant, would you like to go next?
Mm. Mm. Hi, everyone.
Hi everyone, my name is Grant Blasco and my pronouns are he, him. I am honored to be included in this panel with so many dedicated professionals and fellow advocates. For those of you listening, I am a white teenager with auburn-colored curly hair in a camel sweater who is hooked on neatness and order. Laugh out loud. To give you a little more background, I am 18 years old now and an AAC user. Today, I am a senior year honors student, dual enrolled at Bellevue High School in the Running Start program at Bellevue College. I am also a DOIT scholar, which is a long-standing mentoring program at the University of Washington, focused on UDL for college-bound teens with disabilities. My connection to the topic is that I have been doing advocacy work for autism, specifically non-speaking autism, since I was 11 years old. I'm really proud of my work with TASH, Communication First, and several other organizations where I have had an opportunity to stand up for what I believe needs to improve for the benefit of autistic individuals.
Hey. Yeah.
What has school been like for me? That is a great question. I really want to take you through what it feels like to experience a general education classroom without a traditional voice. To be as concise as possible, I have been in general education classes since 5th grade in both Maryland and Washington. However, it has not come without overcoming many barriers every day. I attend a public high school with 1,600 students, and I am the only student with non-speaking autism and the lone AAC user in the building. To say my successes in inclusive education are a source of great pride would be an understatement, but I will say that as I have become older, I have realized it has come at a cost. I felt tremendous pressure to perform and mask as much as possible, and I am trying to learn how to balance this with a much greater attention to my health and authentic self. The most important lesson I have learned is how to see the dream and turn it into a small step forward each day. until all the skills come together. Once this happens, the cumulative changes are impossible to refute.
Thank you. Thank you, Grant. This is Carrie. I hope we'll have some more time to talk about that too. And I'm sure it will come up as a theme in our panel about the ways that we as disabled people, I identify in that way, have been internalized stigma about disability rather than and have been told to be normal or communicate in certain ways or access things in certain ways rather than necessarily being connected with community or the richness of disability or deaf history, for example. So I think it's exciting to see those themes come out on the panel. And AJ, would you want to go next?
Yes. One sec. My name is AJ. I am a brown girl with like purple red glasses on with shorter length braids and what's that? My overall experience in school hasn't been very terrible. The learning aspect has been tricky due to my handwriting not being very good and my math because I'm not good at math either. I don't really know what else to say.
Well, I know that you have, just because I know you a little bit, you don't all this Carrie and you don't all know one another. So this is, and if anybody is watching, this is kind of an interesting dynamic because we're all getting to know each other in this moment. But I do know you, AJ, a bit, and I know that you've been in different school environments too, from homeschooling to, you know, with the parent partnership to more traditional public school environment. And I guess just as a follow-up question there, has there been something different about those environments for you? Did school look different for you in those environments? What was the same issues?
Well, as far as it relating to my disability goes, I don't think, personally, I don't feel like there's really been a difference.
I mean, that's good to know and interesting to think about too, because I know environment can really affect disability experience as well. So it'll be great to learn more about what you would like to see schools look like thinking into the future. And Brianna, would you want to go next?
Um, Hi, my name is Brianna. My pronouns are she, her. I am a brown-skinned African-American girl with a tight bun, and I'm wearing a pink shirt, and I have 3 necklaces on. I live in Seattle, Washington, and my middle school experience, I'm a freshman in high school. My middle school experience wasn't the best. I suffered systemic and institutional racism and disability discrimination. Um, I it uh, it got so bad to the point to where I had gotten physically assaulted by a boy in my classroom, and it led all the way up to a lawsuit. Now I am banned from that school district because I
Carrie, there we go. You're back. I thought we had lost you. Oh, Brianna. No. Oh, we lost you right after you said that you were banned from that school district.
oh, sorry.
Okay.
So yeah, it ended up being a whole lawsuit, and the agreement was for me to win and get banned from that district. And if I didn't win, then I guess I just didn't win. But now I can no longer go to any Renton School District schools, and any school I go to has to be a private school. I have no choice. So I have nothing else to say.
I think that's just it's a really tough thing to share, given that experience and how real that experience is. And I hope that later we'll have a chance too to talk about what that means. I mean, that was your school, and that was your district, and then because schools need to change, that is your place versus adults deciding, especially when you're the victim of something and you've been targeted because of race or disability. So you're pointing out that is a very strange solution. We'll put solution in air quotes to a situation in which you have suffered. So I thank you for sharing that, because you can't be alone with that experience, and that's a lot to go through in middle school. Thanks, Brianna. Sophie, would you like to go next too?
Yes, hello. Let me make sure that the interpreter can see me. Okay, great. Hello, my name is Sophie, and I'm deaf, and I use sign language through an interpreter. So, I guess that you can hear my voice. I'm wearing a black t-shirt. I'm an Asian woman with glasses, and I go by she, her pronouns. So I'm studying now at the University of Washington, and I graduated last year. Sorry, I did study at the University of Washington, graduated last year, and I am now working at Microsoft as a software engineer. And I currently in Santa Barbara, California. And I'm here with my best friend and their family. And so I'm doing work from home. So what my school experience looked like, well, it was interesting and complex. When I was growing up as a Chinese person and a deaf person. And I got here at 13, and I became, interpreters clarifying, I became deaf at 13. So I lost my hearing at 13. And then, so school experience was very frustrating. I wanted to stay in public school, but I wasn't able to continue. So they put me into the deaf school, and I always wanted to, be in a big school with a big education, go on. I wanted to be, I wanted to continue my education into the sciences. So obviously my high school experience was very frustrating because, they said, oh, no, you can't do that. Deaf people can't do that. Oh, no. And they were telling everyone that. And, it's like, I think that we need to work on that, to change, to make those plans so that they can continue with their education. Because I clearly wanted to do my education. My parents supported that too. And so they did a lot of research and found about Gallaudet University in Washington, D.C. So I went there. Oh, I took the SATs and I was accepted to Gallaudet. So that was great. And I moved to Washington, D.C. And I was there for 3 years and I graduated from Gallaudet and I was accepted to the UW. So I moved back and I graduated from UW. At the beginning, as a deaf person, and my school experience was very frustrating and it was very demoralizing and dehumanizing, and they weren't looking at a future, and I felt like I didn't have any future goals. But fortunately, I had a lot of family support, and so there was a lot of negative in my high school experience. But then when I went to Gallaudet, it's like, oh, it was very affirming, and I learned about the culture and my ASL and the deaf identity and all that was involved in that community. So that cultural experience, all of that was, the feeling awkwardness and not fitting in and not belonging and not being the norm was gone, and I totally was there and in my element, and I was seen as a fully functioning person, not just a deaf person. And so I was always kind of feeling, my goal was always to get to University of Washington. So I was able to work through there and graduate from there. And I was, graduated and got my job, got my dream job. And so all of my work and my dreams came through. And so I really felt great about that. And I loved being part of the ASU Dub and that experience. And there's a lot of, as a deaf people, there's, of course I had struggles with the language and the communication, but when I look back at it, it's like, oh, I am so appreciative of that time and the friends and the experiences I had and the person I became through that. And I think it was great because I felt like I was really part of the community, and it was very positive. Thank you.
Thank you. It's Carrie. That's really helpful. And I'm thinking about, I know Julian is going to share next, but I'm thinking about your experience, Sophie, and then Julian being at the School for the Deaf, and then Abby's experience as well. And it'll be interesting to see how those align or are different, especially when I was thinking about what you said about deaf culture and identity. I used to live in DC, so Gallaudet always just seemed really, really cool to me. And I have a friend who is a professor there too. So it seems amazing to go someplace and just have the access and language baked in. Yeah.
Absolutely, yep. It was a very big deal. And it had a large impact on myself and my identity as becoming a capital D deaf person, is that my primary identity. And it just really had a very large impact on my perspective of the world.
Yeah, I can imagine that too. And so that's a good transition to Julian. Julian, if you're ready to share.
We're going to do a quick interpreter switch.
Sounds great.
Hi there. I'm Julian. That's me. I use he, his pronouns. I am Black. I have on a blue sweatshirt and I'm outside right now. Yeah, so I want to explain a little bit about my school experience and the discrimination I experienced and made my way through. I'm sorry, I don't go to school in DC. Wait, what am I saying? I'm hooked on Sophie's story. Wait, I am actually at Washington School for the Deaf. It's an amazing school. Have great teachers. I'm getting a great education here. I love it here. Before I was here, I was in a mainstream school that had a deaf program. And the deaf program was fantastic. But the problem was I was bullied. I couldn't go out and do things for fun. I just would stay in the classroom and read. because I didn't feel like I could be out in the school community. So that wasn't great. But when I came down to WSD, Washington School for the Deaf, I mean, it was just amazing. I don't even know how to explain it. I mean, what coming here was like. It was just so amazing. I was able to go out. I was able to like just play and hang out and communicate with my friends and communicate with the staff. I could communicate directly with my teachers. I wasn't limited anymore. It was so fun. It's just cool.
This is Carrie. I'm so glad that that was your experience at the School for the Deaf, and I appreciate you sharing that you had been bullied in that other setting, and that it was just really healing to be, like you said, it just like you could just go out and play and hang out, and your teachers would communicate with you in your language, and there wouldn't be this big deal about what are you asking for? Why do you need this? Why can't you fit into our environment? So it just, I'm really glad that you had that experience. And I think if I'm remembering, your family moved to have that experience. So you have a cool family too. Although you may not feel that way as a teenager right now. I don't know.
Yeah, my whole family moved.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was really cool. Eric, would you like to go next?
Yeah, so my name is Eric. I use she, her pronouns. I wear glasses. I have brown hair that I have tied back, although it's a bit messy. And I have some facial hair. I am genderqueer and autistic and Jewish. And I grew up on the unceded lands of the Duwamish in Bellevue, and I now live in Spokane on the lands of the Spokane Nation. And I went through special education in K through 12, and I have worked as a para-educator. I now currently work at a very cool disability rights organization you may have heard of called the ARC of King County. Yeah, so I'll answer the first question, which is what has school been like for me? So it was fairly difficult, especially in elementary school. I was things because of manifestations of disability were considered behavior problems, and I frequently had to endure isolation and restraint. I was even, like, everything I would do sometimes would be considered like a behavior problem. Like one time when I was trying to say brachot over my food, which is blessings over my food, which before I eat them as a Jewish person, I was told I couldn't do that. And that it was an issue in my district, or that it was illegal because it was religious or something like that. For most of the time when I was in elementary school, I was in a self-contained environment. And in middle school and high school, I was a lot more mainstreamed, which I really appreciated, but I did face a lot of bullying for who I was, and how I moved and how I talk and everything. And those special education environments were also very ableist. They created a disability hierarchy between people who often the special education teachers and paraeducators would consider more fit to be in a mainstream environment, and people who weren't, and they'd relay those messages oftentimes very directly to students. And that was just something that was very bad for like my understandings of myself and relating to other people, and and stuff like that. I had a lot of issues with responding to harassment, and also teachers not really wanting to include me in classrooms, and just a lot of weird things sometimes. So in the middle school, I went to the self-contained behavioral program I was in for some of the time. Like the school resource officer would oftentimes go into that classroom and just like be there and watch us. It was very odd. So in high school, I got into a lot of different forms of advocacy. I joined the Gay Straight Alliance there, and I started my own Disabled Abled Coalition, and I was part of the Feminist Club as well. And that was really helpful for me to also learn more about autistic rights and neurodiversity to help me not constantly blame myself, but also understand how ableism was bad and was also wrong for everyone else to have to deal with ableism. And now as I work in schools sometimes, and when I've worked in schools, the understandings I have from those lived experiences really shape how I try and be a good paraeducator.
Thank you for sharing that. This is Carrie. Thank you for sharing that, Eric. And I was just and listening to the panel, thinking about the reflections that Anita had made about the physical environment and sort of the delays in responding to that and fixing things, and what Abby had shared about the anxiety and stress that can come up with school, especially when you're not viewed as a full person, and celebrate it for those talents that and lived experiences that you bring, including culture, and Grant talking about not being in inclusive ed until 5th grade, and also just having those kind of the mismatch or gap between needs, access needs, and how people are responding to them. And AJ sharing about how school became, there's certain things about school that they identified, there were barriers like handwriting and math where they didn't feel as effective there. And so school wasn't positive in that way. And Brianna sharing about the systemic and institutional racism that has really, and the ableism that has really shaped where she is right now. And Sophie about deaf culture and getting into tech and having those opportunities in science and career, while also having community, but having that academic rigor and community at the same time to achieve those goals. And Julian's experiences too. There was the situation of being in the program versus being in a community and campus where language is being used, and being with your people, like your folks who understand what it is and you don't have to explain or apologize. And then how Eric shared about the isolation and restraint and how she was identified as being the behavior problem, even for religious practices, rather than just really understanding the ways in which we are all people who bring differences and beliefs to environments, and that we need to be honored for that. And so that how that shaped Eric's work now in education. So I haven't met most of you before, but this is good. So I have enjoyed getting to know a little bit about each of you, and I hope that you all will continue this conversation with each other too. I want to move to our next question that I had given in advance about what schools would look like if you led them. Because I think there's the piece of, here are the things that went wrong. And I have my own stories of education from a long time ago. But we're in a moment where you would think there could be an opportunity for some change. And many of us are asking, if things aren't going to change now, then when are they? We're quickly returning to this idea of what quote normal is, or what is desirable to go back to. And some of those things are not very inclusive, and many of those things have not changed. Things like systemic racism, or transphobia, or not honoring being multilingual. So I was just really interested in hearing, based on what you all have experienced from your different life perspectives, what schools would look like if you ran them. I know that you're not all working in education. We've got human development, a couple folks in education, some people still not having graduated yet, an engineer. But if you were in charge, what would they look like? And the second piece of that is, what is the role of people who are not deaf, aren't blind, aren't autistic, aren't disabled in making this change happen? So I'd love to start with Anita with that question, and to just talk about, especially as an educator, if we gave you the keys to the school and we kicked everyone else out except for the students, you have to keep the students. Maybe. what would it look like? So Anita is principal now, or superintendent. I vote for either. Or OSPI. You can be in charge of whatever you want. What does school look like? And what should other people who aren't disabled do to support that, or get out of the way, whatever it is that you want them to do?
That's a very complicated question, but I'll start with, as I mentioned earlier, my biggest issue with schools has been the physical environment, and it has prevented me from being able to join in and participate the way I wanted to as a kid and even as an adult. So I guess I would say one of the main things I would wish to do if I were in charge would be to advocate for a universal design when it came to building the school. I would love it if we didn't have to make the changes after a student came along that had a problem with it, but that the school was already set up to accommodate them in the first place, which would have changed so many things. I could have used the library in my high school. I went 4 years in high school writing research papers and never made it to the library because it was on the second floor. At least the internet was my friend. Other things I would do, I would push to have a more representative and inclusive curriculum. People with disabilities aren't talked about in curriculums. They're not talked about, neither are people of color, not very well at least. And most of the time, if they are talked about, it's written by a white person, which I think is a huge problem in itself. So I want to change the curriculum. I want it to be more inclusive. That's a huge change. What could we do now that could make a difference in schools here without giant changes? So I think that where I would start if I were to do this tomorrow would be to bring in mentors into young classrooms, older classrooms that were people with disabilities, that were people of color. I want to bring them into the classroom and have them talk to students about what they do as adults, how they lived their lives. When I was a kid, I struggled so much with kids not understanding how my wheelchair was a part of me and that wasn't going to change, and they had to respect it. And I didn't have the words to tell them that. So my mom came into the classroom, who by chance is also a wheelchair user, and she told them about how she felt like her wheelchair was a part of her body, and that no one had any permission to touch it, and that just because I did things differently didn't mean that I couldn't do them as well. And those are great conversations to have with young kids and with older students. I think it's all good to talk about. So I'm really happy that adults get to see me, or children get to see me do that. Yeah, I think that's all I have, actually.
We're going to do an interpreter switch. Thank you. Go ahead.
So Anita, I would ask, and I also want to disclose that Anita's mom went to my daughter's classroom and did that in preschool. So thank you, Karen, Anita's mom. Anita's mom is not available to go to everyone's classroom. But the second part of that question was, I'd love for you to just talk a little bit more about that is, you talked about mentors. So what about people who don't have disabilities? You've got parents. I'm a disabled mom with a disabled kid. You with a disabled daughter. You and your mom have the same kind of situation. But I'm thinking people are joining us today that are parents who don't have disabilities or aren't deaf or aren't blind, but have kids who have disabilities or deaf or blind, for example. Or there are educators who don't have disabilities. And you know that very well working in the field. So what should those folks do? Because we do a lot of this labor in making the environment, including that second floor library, work for us or working around it. So what job can we give those people?
I think if you are somebody who has a connection with somebody who's a disabled person, as much as I don't want able-bodied people to speak for disabled people, I think it would also be, in my opinion, fine for them to share their experience that their child has, or that they've heard of adults with their child's similar disability, if parents are free to do that. But I think it's also not just about having someone with a disability in the classroom. I think, when you do career days, that's a great way to show young people what they have the potential to do with their lives when they grow up. And disability, people of color, I think it's all useful. As much as I would love the representation to be there, I do understand that you can't always find a person with disability. However, I will say that on multiple occasions, my mother has been asked by random teachers in the Seattle School District that she doesn't know and they invite her into the classroom to talk to their students, and she loves that. So teachers could reach out and find community members who may be willing to do talks for their class. And if you can't find someone to do talk for your class, how can you make your projects inclusive? Can you start thinking about ways to talk about disability in a positive way, even if you don't have a mentor?
Yeah, I like that you have we have to work with something we have now. I'm not advocating for incrementalism, but we need other people to do the work, just like white people are grappling with the idea that we have to work on racism, not expect someone else to teach us about it, to do that additional emotional labor. So I'm thinking, as you raised, especially for disabled people of color too, like, how can others be allies and accomplices there? So Abby, I think I accidentally muted you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, great, thank you. So Abby, the same question, what would things look like if you led schools? And what can other people do to lighten that load or do their part and not getting in the way?
If I lead school, first thing I want to make sure to do is make sure no bullying, discrimination, racism in my school environment. I want to make sure people, teachers, volunteers, and everybody, at least have a diverse environment. My definitely, I want to have teachers who are people of color, at least for history class, because history class, especially US history class, could be very, very traumatizing to Black students. Second, I would do is, like other person said, I want to have a mentor for especially for students who are underrepresented, just like myself. I want them have one-on-one mentor. I can also have a mentor for other kids who are able to, not non-disabled kids, school students too, but specifically students who suffer are disabled and student of color. So I'm gonna make sure they have mentors first, because when I was in the school, when, I'm sorry to say this, but my history teacher said he wished slavery still exists. If it did, he will use it. I didn't have a mentor and I suffered through it. I didn't know who to talk to. And I went through trauma by myself. So first thing I'm gonna make sure is there's a mentor. That if I have Black students, disabled students, especially Black disabled students, I'm gonna start with a mentor. Also, I'm gonna make sure to make accessible everything, like accessible. I don't want students with who use this, wheelchairs has to stay downstairs. They can't get upstairs. I'm gonna make sure everybody access materials, like blind person like me. Um, I read Braille. I use VoiceOver, which speaks to me on my phone or Apple Max computer, or like other screen readers I use. I'm gonna make sure every student in my school get experience of using, like at least reading Braille, tactile graphs, everything. So students, other sighted students who are non-disabled can have experience what disabled kids experience. I'm gonna make sure everybody understands disabled people are not lesser than them, and not disabled students are not there to be bullied. Instead, they are there to learn too. Um, I'm gonna make sure everything accessible for my students. Um, um, as about the allies, non-disabled allies, I think they should do is like learn with students who are disabled. For example, students who are disabled and the students non-disabled should be together learning each other. Like I want to make sure non-disabled students learn how to interact with disabled students. Right now, what school is doing, they're teaching disabled students how to interact with non-disabled students, but they don't bother teaching non-disabled students how to interact with disabled students. So my plan would be, first, I'm gonna have like disability study classes, and everybody aware of what disabled students like, and aware of what Braille, what tactile graphs, what sign language, what visual and non-visual stuff. Everybody can support each other and be ally, and later they can educate other people who didn't get chance to learn what disability is like, what anxiety, like what trauma, what stress, um, for disabled students, especially disabled students of color. Thank you.
You shared so much there, and I know, I mean, I can't imagine how you wouldn't have had anxiety and trauma given that you had a teacher that said they wish that slavery was still alive. And I'm thinking about how others could have shown up in that moment and didn't, and said, you know, what the hell? Like, what is going on with this? That's not okay. I mean, someone is saying that in a classroom environment, they shouldn't have their job anymore. They probably shouldn't be
Absolutely.
around people, but
Actually, after he said that some students didn't want like treat me differently, and one student in the cafeteria, he didn't want to sit at a table, lunch table where I was sitting. He called my table, that's his lab table, and he moved a different table. You know, like young students, like in high school, middle school, we are all about image and identity development, and all my identity, my development in my young teenager life crashed, and it shattered me and caused me a lot of trauma and anxiety, and not being fitting with people and not being white and respected, and being Black, and experiencing racism like that in the school. They should immediately put mentor for Black students, minority students in the schools, so they can prevent that kind of trauma.
Yeah, I mean, it shouldn't happen, but just having that resource, I mean, when you're being erased and attacked, could help a little bit, having somewhere to go. So thank you for sharing that. And there's so much that we can do for each other, and places that we can show up better, and make it safer and just more respectful, and treat people as humans, and that you weren't being treated like a human being at all. I'm very aware that this second question is taking a little bit longer than I planned. But what we're going to do, I just want to let people know that are joining us who may have questions for the panelists, is we're going to keep going with the panel. If there are questions that we're not able to answer before Kimberly has to step in and wrap this up, we'll offer them to the panelists to answer by email if they want, but we'll make sure that everyone in the panel has a chance to move forward, and we'll put the questions, audience questions, to the side. So Grant, would you like to share next?
I want to say that stress related to the stigma of my non-speaking status is constant, and I will change that immediately in schools by helping educators understand that guessing what students need is not the same as asking them. Please understand that finding a community where you feel valuable, even on your worst days, is critically important for mental health. When I started to be included, I did not know what I needed to be successful, but interestingly, I didn't learn those things in school either. I actually learned about lots of meaningful topics at conferences from inclusion education professors and adult disability activists, and I took what they said and tried to advocate for myself. Only, when I was in middle school, it didn't always go well. I think disability advocates need to become allies within the system to support students and parents, because when the training about disability rights is not a part of the staff understanding, then my advocacy can be misunderstood as insubordination. What this teaches kids is that the continuation of the power dynamic of the able-bodied will prevail. Their absence of knowledge was only interpreted as my additional deficit. It was not until I became older and more educated and more galvanized that I was finally able to articulate that I was in the right all along. I would like to feel safer at school. By that I mean, more people would notice the injustices and inequity I faced every day. I do want to share that I have had support for inclusion from the very beginning, and I have highly motivated professionals all around me who wanted to see me succeed, but the process of doing it has still been bumpy and lonely. Missing huddle and missing understanding of disability culture was difficult. The more aware people are, the more they can step in to correct the imbalance. To say it would be an interesting exercise to follow me around for a day and count up all the barriers I hit would be an understatement. We all need teachers who are respectful and compassionate. We need teachers who see us struggle and who respond by building more support into the curriculum until we get the right mixture of ease and challenge to make learning really fun and as successful as possible. If I were to describe my ideal school day, I think to start, I would want to have someone greet me at the door. And if music was playing, even better. I would head to my first class, and I would know exactly what was going to happen. I would already have written my response to a question the teacher gave me ahead of time, so I could share the answer with my peers. Later, as I navigated in the halls, people would acknowledge me, and I would return their hellos with a friendly smile, and they would know how much easier it happens if they say hi first. Lunch in the cafeteria would be too chaotic for me to use my device and be heard, so a few friends would ask if I could come to a quieter place to join them and talk a bit about a book we're all reading in English. Next, I would settle in to work on a math curriculum that was actually set up for me to access it easily, and I could pull a few questions together that showed how fast I can work if the technology tools considered my needs. The day would end with me on the track, running with a group who barely noticed I couldn't talk, because they were focused on letting me just use my stride to stay the course for a while. Overall, when I read this, it doesn't seem like a lot to ask of a school, does it? Then why is this so different from what most of my memories are of public school? I think we can do so much better with a little bit more exposure to disability advocacy and culture, and maybe a little more empathy too. Lately, I am working on several projects designed to give practical advice for educators for how to include students with complex communication needs. My focus has been on universal design for learning support, which, when present, minimizes my need to ask for ADA 504 accommodations. I am also interested in the role of trauma-informed classrooms in supporting all students by better understanding that trauma is a personal perception based on previous and cumulative exposure. My thought is that many students who have been marginalized have experienced developmental trauma. When I see panels like this forming, I think we are moving in the right direction. Thank you for the opportunity to share, and please email me with questions or comments at blasco@gmail.com.
Thank you.
I'm going to pause for a quick interpreter switch. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for, this is Carrie. Thank you for that grant, and just recognizing the theme of trauma and thinking about the schools that you, Anita, and Abby have laid out, and the question of why is this so hard? And why is it hard to greet people, to honor people, to have community for students? So yeah, that's really landed on me as well. And a question that I always have, like, why is this so hard? AJ, would you like to go next?
Yes. If schools were ran by me, there would be easier ways for everyone, for anyone with any levels of ability to be able to thrive. I would make sure that issues with discrimination would always be dealt with. Anything that has to do with limiting anyone's self-esteem. I would change history lessons to be more accurate from Black people's perspective, and people with disabilities could be in school like they were one of the able-bodied people, even with their accommodations. When you have everyone into a room, it's not like the disabled people will stand out or the able-bodied people will stand out. It will just be. No one will have to stand out.
Thank you for that, AJ. And I'm just thinking about what Abby said as well, and Anita, about the importance of mentoring, and then having teachers of color and having history taught in ways that honor people, and celebrate Black joy and Black wisdom in particular. how that changes things rather than it exacerbating trauma by being taught things that further discrimination and belittling and of others and racism. Brianna, would you like to go next? This is Carrie. Brianna, would you like to go next, or should we go to someone else and come back? Oh, there you are.
Yeah, I'm sorry, it froze. As a person of color, if I had an opportunity to lead a school, my top priority one of my top priorities would focus on Black history, because for
This is Carrie. I think Brianna
Yeah.
froze. Oh, Brianna is back now. Okay, you're back. I love Zoom. Okay, you have these cliffhangers, so I think it's it's increasing the suspense of the rest of what you're going to say. So, go for it. So yeah, you're back. I'm going to take advantage of that.
Okay. What was I saying? Okay, so coming from my siblings and myself was that they had actually dropped out of school because there was no Black history. Like, there was nothing really to learn, because at my old schools, I learned about the same thing every single year and nothing was different. So in my siblings' minds, it was kind of like, what was the point? We're just going to learn the same thing, same history every year. And it's just like, it just doesn't really make sense. So that's one thing. And another thing would be to be more serious about I forgot how to say it. Systemic and institutional racism, because going through it was very, very difficult, and I would hate for anybody else to go through that. So I would, instead of helping a student with the problem, I would rather like be more involved with it if they would allow me to, because that type of stuff is traumatic and it could lead up to something way worse than it already is. What else? I would also, in a lot of schools, they have a lot of people separated in many schools. And for me in school, I used to get separated from my class because my teachers used to think that I was a distraction because of my hair or something like that, or say that it was unprofessional when I was just being a kid with curly hair. So they used to separate me from my class a lot, and they would isolate me in a completely different room. And I don't know if anybody else's school did that, but my school did that for some reason. And just for the rest of the day, I would just be in this cold room with one person, and I couldn't interact with anybody else. I couldn't talk to anybody else, because if I did talk to anybody else, then they would put me in after school detention and keep me there until like 6 or 7 p.m. So I never really tried it, and I would never do that personally, because that's traumatizing. But that's all I can think of right now.
I mean, I'm not telling you anything you don't know. You were punished for being Black, and it's happening to kids everywhere. I think what's really hard for people, at least in the conversations that I'm in with other adults, particularly in education, is thinking about racism in a different way. When you're talking about systemic and institutional racism, people tend to think about racism as individual actions. The individual actions against you, especially about your hair. I mean, I don't know at what age you're supposed to become professional. Your hair has nothing to do with it. And you're a kid. You can wear your hair whatever way you want at any age, and someone shouldn't be making you have to conform to some white idea of what is appropriate. So everything that happened to you, I wish it was, oh, that's a rarity, but it happens. And just, I think, in education, we all need to think about what our responsibility is and making sure that doesn't happen, and then seeing all the patterns in which it happened. It's just not an anomaly. So thank you for sharing that. I hope it shapes someone's action about something, or at least holds people more accountable in that moment and working across coalition and movements together. Sophie, do you want to go next?
Yeah. If I could make it my perfect school, I want it to be some place where people feel like being deaf or being disabled is just normal. Like, I wouldn't want everybody to look at me and say, oh, that's a deaf person. I just like them to look at me and say, hey, there's Sophie. But I think in order to do that, in order to change that, I guess as the leader of the school, I would want people to talk about disability. I'd want it to just be part of part of the discussion. Let's name the elephant in the room. But I feel like, people don't talk about it, and they feel awkward if they talk about it, or they talk about it superficially. And then I've noticed people feel awkward when I bring it up. And I've gone out and, I live in this world, and I come up and I'm trying to do a general everyday transaction, and I write on a piece of paper, hey, I'm deaf. And they look at me like I'm some sort of alien and start to apologize to me. And I don't get that, And I think too, I used to be a teaching assistant at the UW. And then one quarter, we had survey of the students, and they asked how the teaching assistant was doing. And one of them said, Sophie really exceeded my expectations. And other people would say, Sophie's disability didn't get in the way. And I was really frustrated with those kinds of comments because my abilities weren't recognized. They didn't comment on my teaching skills. They commented on what they called disability. That was not the question. The question wasn't, how did Sophie's disability do? And so I went and talked to that professor, and I said, you really need to address this and make sure that next time this comes up, that they're really focusing on the teaching assistants' teaching skills, not their skin color or their disability or anything else like that. So yeah, and I remember when I confronted the professor, wouldn't that, and the professor was like, wouldn't that make you feel called out or like you're, spotlighted? I'm like, I'm already spotlighted and people already feel weird and awkward around me. So you're not going to spare me anything by not addressing it. And so I really appreciated Grant and Abby sharing that experience. I've had that same experience. you know, like struggling with access and struggling with the perception of us as a disabled person, you know, and people do think about us differently. And it's really hard to get through that. Yeah, and it, you know, and it can be awkward to talk about it, but we got to talk about it or it makes it worse. So if I were running the school, I would encourage everybody to start talking about it and to start thinking about the different perspectives that people have, the different experiences. Yeah, I would like people to learn about it and talk about it and stop being awkward about it or embarrassed about it. And please stop saying sorry. Yeah, I want equity. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie, for sharing that. I was a disabled professor and I had a similar experience where I never quite felt like, and even now at 44, that I'm a real whatever. Like, am I a real professor? Was I a real lawyer? Am I a real estate agency director? And it's awful to be patronized and be told like, oh, Sophie's so smart, or Carrie's so smart, or they're so funny, when someone wouldn't say that to someone else. It's sort of like giving someone a patronizing cookie.
Carrie,
Than,
this is the
yeah.
interpreter, Sienna. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
I'm going to request that the lighting right now is making the interpretation challenging to see on the screen.
Yes.
So I'm going to request a short pause to remedy that. Is that better? Yes, it is. Thank you.
Thank you for that indulgence. Thank you for letting me know.
Yes, thank you. Julianne, would you like to go next?
Yes, hello. I've been thinking about this. And if I became president or the superintendent of the school, what would I want changed? Well, specifically, I mean, less discrimination, of course. I mean, just no discrimination at all. You know, for whatever group. And I'd like to see more diversity among all the staff, among the teachers, I mean, just everyone. Because when the students are only seeing white, there's no diversity. The students don't see anybody, you know, the only people they see that look like themselves are at home, or, you know, you want to see people among all parts of your life that look like you. And also to celebrate everyone, all the students, no matter their religion, their culture. You want to recognize and celebrate all of that. And like recently at my school, they haven't had it until now. They just started this on February 1st. It started, you know, of course, with Black History Month. And so the kids are learning, and it was good to hear about Black people. And I mean, if I became superintendent of the school, I'd want to have all sorts of different diversity and all of that education so that the kids, no matter who they are, can feel comfortable and feel fully engaged and participating, and not just be bored because there's nobody, they don't see anybody else in authority that looks like them.
And thank you for that too. I mean, you are among several people on the panel who have said that we need teachers of color, we need disabled and deaf teachers, and schools can't erase, even though they have been, Black history, Black culture, or treat it like it's an add-on, as if it's for a week or for a month. And I mean, it's editing all of history to have left that out. And especially when we just think about all the contributions and where everything started. So to like do colonial America or Greece or something makes no sense factually either, let alone the harm that happens from not having teachers of color.
Yes.
Eric, would you like to wrap us up?
Yeah, so this is a question I really struggled a lot with. When I was much younger, I had a lot more very concrete thoughts, and I was very adamant about very certain models of schooling that I still am, such as the ones from the Francisco Ferrer School, modern school movement, where students are actually taking control of their own education. And stuff like that. I think that's very important. But having worked in a lot of these school environments as an openly disabled person, many of them are very toxic work environments, honestly. I'm treated differently due to my disabilities. It's suspect when I'm not openly discriminating against certain students. It's very, very surreal, you know? And I think in terms of this question, the very big prerequisite to what would it look like if people with disabilities were running the school, and the prerequisite is that people with disabilities are actually running the school, right? That we're properly represented in that, and also that the staff actually accurately represents who the students are. I worked at schools where nearly all the teachers and staff were whites, and it was a majority non-white school, right? That is inherently racist. That needs to not happen, and it's not for a lack of qualified educators of color, right? And it's not for a lack of qualified disabled educators. It's because of discrimination in the ways our schools are set up. I do think, like, if you are an educator listening to this and you want to know more about how to approach your work in terms of equity and approach your work in terms of having schools work better for students with disabilities, actually listening to your students and not assuming that because of their positionality, because of who they are, that they're automatically in the wrong, right? Or that there's no reason for them to do something. You need to actually listen and consider your own bias, and also challenge your coworkers. And those sound very basic, and often many trainings will have those exact same things, but I actually want to see it in action, right? We also have school systems that are structured in ways that are structurally ableist and structurally racist. And those are difficult for individual people to deal with. And it's often very difficult to just try to deal with that as an educator. And the answer to that is organizing. You need to talk with your coworkers. You need to be active in your union And you need to start pushing for these changes and having those conversations. That's really what I think is necessary for this, supporting your marginalized coworkers and organizing. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. I'm going to I want to thank everyone. And I'm going to hand things over to Kimberly, but I just wanted to share just some of the things that popped out about stop apologizing. We have to have a commitment to tackling white supremacy and seeing racial justice. We need to think about representation and equity and how we support students and teachers who are already in these toxic systems, who are already having violence enacted against them, to have them be able to survive that, let alone be mentors later on, because it's happening right now while still working to make sure that we upend the system. So thank you all so much. And thanks to Dinah, Jen, Jennifer, Sarah, for being our volunteers today too. And thanks to Kimberly and Robin.
This is Kimberly Mack. Thank you everybody for joining us. Yes, special thank you to all of our panelists. It was absolutely amazing to listen to you and be able to give you an opportunity to have a place for your voice. You have shared so much information that there's so much I will take from this. So thank you very much. As a reminder, this event was recorded. There have been several people asking if they will get copies of the link. Yes, the link will be sent out to all people who registered for this event. You can share it with anybody you wish to share it with once you receive the link. The Office of the Educational Ombuds has also asked us to share a survey link. It's gone out several times in the chat, especially if you need clock hours. Please reach out to Carrie, and Carrie's email address has been in the chat also several times. I'm hoping it can go back in there one last quick time. In May, the KCDC Understanding Ableism series will be also covering transportation, ableism and transportation. And in June, we will be covering ableism within employment. So please don't forget to join us for those events. They will be on Eventbrite. They are on the third Thursday of the month. And again, you will be able to find those on Eventbrite. So thank you everybody for joining us. Robin, do you want to say a quick goodbye?
This is Robin. A quick goodbye. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks everybody on the panel. You were just so amazing to spend time with. And I wish there could have been more time, especially as you were sharing some truth about what happened in your lives. And, you know, we can't really do that justice in 3 to 4 minutes, especially as folks that have never met each other. So I really appreciate just that honesty and vulnerability and trust and making space for each other. So yeah, thank you. And I hope that you're not all strangers. And I thank my friends who brought you into my life too. So, because like I said, I only knew a couple of you before.
Thank you for opportunity.
Thank you, Abby.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. It was absolutely amazing to get a chance to meet you all. I'm sad that this is the first time I've had to meet you, but I hope this is not the last time I get to interact with all of you. So thank you very much.
This is Robin. I'm absolutely the same. A few of you I know, but not everyone.
Thank you for having me.
Always.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll see you all later.
Good night,
Bye.
everyone.
See you.
Bye.
Bye.